September 1943. Washington, D.C. The office smelled of tobacco and old paper. Eleanor Ellie Morrison was 20 years old, but her green eyes carried a determination that made men twice her age step back. She didn't step back. "Miss Morrison," Colonel Patterson adjusted his glasses, observing her over the desk covered with classified documents. "You understand this is not a conventional mission?" Ellie kept her hands steady on her lap, even as she felt cold sweat on her palms. Outside the window, the American capital continued its accelerated wartime rhythm. Women in factory uniforms, recruitment posters on every corner, the palpable tension of a world on fire. "I understand perfectly, sir." Her voice didn't tremble. It couldn't tremble, not after everything she'd sacrificed to be in that room. Patterson exchanged a glance with the only other woman present, Major Sarah Chen from the Office of Strategic Services. Chen was a silent legend, one of the few women in command positions in military intelligence. She nodded almost imperceptibly. "Your French is impeccable," Chen began, her voice soft but carrying undeniable authority. "Born in Paris, lived there until age 12. Your file says you can pass as a native without effort." "Yes, ma'am. My mother was French. I grew up bilingual." "And your brother?" Patterson's question came like a calculated blow. "Thomas Morrison, first lieutenant, killed in action at Anzio 6 months ago." Ellie closed her eyes for a moment. Tommy, her older brother, who had always protected her, who swore he'd come home, who never did. "Yes, sir." "And that doesn't make you emotionally compromised for this type of operation?" It was Chen who answered, her voice cutting. "Colonel, if we waited for soldiers without personal losses in this war, we'd be fighting alone." Patterson sighed, opening a folder marked with red stamps. "Secret. Top secret. Eyes only." "Operation Lurebird," he began. "Occupied France, Brittany region. We have intelligence that German High Command is using an old estate, Chateau de Montclair, as a coordination center for coastal defenses. With the Allied invasion approaching, we need intelligence on these fortifications." Ellie leaned forward, absorbing every word. "We tried conventional infiltration, lost 3 agents in 2 months. The Germans are paranoid, and for good reasons. But..." Patterson slid a photograph across the desk. "They have a blind spot." The image showed a German officer, tall, with meticulously combed blonde hair, impeccable uniform. There was something aristocratic in his features, but also a coldness in his eyes that made Ellie shudder. Obersturmbannführer Klaus von Richter, Chen identified. SS officer, 38 years old, commander of counter-espionage operations in the region. Highly intelligent, ruthless, responsible for the capture of dozens of Allied agents. "And his blind spot?" Ellie asked, though she already knew the answer. "Women," Patterson said bluntly. "Specifically, young, educated, upper-class women. He collects them like trophies. Elegant dinners, operas, parties at the chateau. None of them were harmed. He considers himself a gentleman of the old world, but all were discarded when he lost interest." "You would be the bait," Chen continued. "Margot Beaumont, young French woman from Parisian high society, refugee in Brittany after Allied bombings destroyed her properties. Lonely, vulnerable, fascinated by power. The perfect profile to attract von Richter." Ellie studied the photograph, predator's eyes disguised as European charm. "And once inside?" "Once inside," Patterson leaned forward, "you'll have access to the documents we need. Plans of the fortifications, troop numbers, artillery positions, everything that can save thousands of Allied lives when we land." "And the 52 Germans?" Ellie asked directly, referring to the operation code she'd seen in the file header. Heavy silence filled the room. Chen finally answered, "Once you obtain the information and transmit it, the French resistance will execute Operation Storm. Von Richter holds a monthly meeting with his 51 superior officers at the chateau. Strategic planning, intelligence analysis, all in the same place at the same time." "Will the resistance attack?" "Not exactly," Patterson corrected. "You'll provide the exact coordinates. The RAF will conduct a precision bombing, surgical, fast." Ellie swallowed hard. "And I'll be inside. You'll have a 4-hour evacuation window before the attack, The resistance will extract you, but— Chen paused, choosing her words carefully. The chances of something going wrong are substantial. That's why we're asking for volunteers. Not asking, Ellie corrected softly. I volunteered 3 months ago when I joined OSS. I knew something like this might come. Patterson opened a small leather case, revealing a tiny pill in glass. Cyanide, standard for all infiltrated agents. If you're captured, if torture is imminent. He didn't finish the sentence. Ellie took the case without hesitation, placing it in the inner pocket of her blazer. When do I leave? Chen smiled, a sad smile, full of understanding. 48 hours. You'll have intensive training in counter-surveillance protocol, radio communication, basic hand-to-hand combat. It won't be enough. It never is. But it's what we have. And my cover. Margot Beaumont really existed, Patterson explained. Died in a bombing in Paris last year. No close relatives. We've created a complete backstory. Documents, photographs, even false memories you'll need to memorize. Your handler in France will be known only as Rossignol, Nightingale. He'll make the initial contact. Ellie stood up, feeling the weight of that moment. 20 years old. A few months ago, she was studying French literature at university, dreaming of being a teacher. Now she was about to become a ghost, to live or die by codes and secrets. Miss Morrison? Chen also stood, extending her hand. I won't lie saying everything will be fine, but I can say you're doing something extraordinary. Something that matters. Ellie gripped the firm hand, feeling calluses from someone who had also been in the field. My brother used to say, Ellie began, voice heavy with controlled emotion, that war doesn't choose heroes. It reveals who they always were. I think I'm about to discover who I really am. Patterson nodded gravely. May God be with you. As Ellie left the office, the weight of the cyanide case in her pocket was a constant reminder. Some missions were one way only. But if Tommy had given his life on the beaches of Italy, she could give hers in the shadows of France. The OSS building corridor echoed with her solitary footsteps. Through the window, Washington continued its frantic wartime dance. But Ellie Morrison, at 20 years old, was already crossing a portal, leaving behind everything she knew, becoming Margot Beaumont. The bait was ready. 2 nights later, Ellie was crouched in the cargo compartment of a B-24 bomber, the roar of the engines shaking every bone in her body. There were no comfortable seats, just improvised safety straps and the smell of aviation fuel mixed with cold sweat. Beside her, Sergeant Mike Bull Harrison checked the parachute on her back for the 3rd time. Bull was in his 40s, veteran of 1,000 insertion missions, large hands but surprisingly delicate when adjusting the straps. First time jumping at night? He shouted above the engine noise. Ellie nodded. Training had included only 3 daytime jumps. There was no time for more. Don't think, just jump when I tell you. Count to 4, pull the cord. If it doesn't open, we have the reserve. If the reserve doesn't open, he gave a crooked smile. Well, it won't hurt much. Soldier's dark humor. Ellie forced a smile. Actually, she had trained almost without sleeping for 48 hours. Memorization of cover stories, practice of regional French accent, radio codes, secret meeting protocols. Chen had been merciless, testing her repeatedly, waking her at dawn to ask questions about her childhood in Paris. Margot, what was your dog's name? Bisou, a spaniel, died when I was 13. Your grandmother's maiden name? Claudette Renoir, distant cousin of the painter, she always said. Address in Paris? Rue de Rivoli, 47, apartment overlooking the Tuileries. Every detail, every lie had to become truth, because a single inconsistency meant death. The co-pilot appeared in the compartment doorway, making signals. 15 minutes to the drop zone. Bull began checking her equipment once more. The small suitcase with false documents, French money, period clothes. Everything artificially aged, nothing that looked too new. Remember, Bull said, voice more serious now. As soon as you land, bury the parachute. No matter how tired you are, no matter if you hear patrols, bury it deep. Then head west until you find Saint-Michel Church. Rossignol will be waiting. And if he's not, then improvise. You were trained for this. The co-pilot shouted, 5 minutes. Ellie felt her stomach tighten. Outside the fuselage, the absolute darkness of occupied France. No city lights, no beacons. The Germans had imposed total blackout, but somewhere down there, in the dark, the resistance was waiting. Ordinary men and women who risked everything, daily, against a war machine occupying their land. Tommy had fought on the beaches of Italy against machine guns and artillery. Ellie was about to fight with something much more dangerous: lies, seduction, and the fine line between surviving and betraying everything she loved. "Let's go!" Bull opened the side hatch. The freezing March wind invaded the compartment, stealing the air from Ellie's lungs. Down below, far away, she could see the dark pattern of fields and forests. Somewhere, there was a clearing where the resistance had lit 3 fires in an L shape. The signal. "I see the target," the navigator shouted. Bull held Ellie by the shoulders, eyes locked on hers. "You can do this, girl. I've seen hundreds of soldiers. You've got what it takes. Now go out there and make those bastards pay." Ellie nodded, holding tight to the parachute straps. "Go! Go! Go!" And she jumped. The wind hit her like a freight train. The engine roar disappeared, replaced by the whistle of air cutting through her body. 4 seconds that felt eternal. 1, 2, 3, 4. She pulled the cord. The parachute opened with a violent snap, almost dislocating her shoulders. Suddenly the world slowed down. She was floating, suspended between sky and earth, between who she was and who she needed to become. The clearing approached rapidly. Too rapidly. Ellie flexed her knees as taut, preparing for impact. Bang! She rolled, sharp pain in her right ankle, but nothing broken. Quickly, she began burying the parachute in a previously dug hole. The resistance thought of everything. She covered it with earth and leaves, erasing any evidence. In the distance, the sound of German truck engines. Night patrol. Ellie hid behind a tree, controlling her breathing. Headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the rural road a few meters away. Voices in German, laughter, someone smoking. She waited. 5 minutes, 10, 15. Finally, the trucks moved away. Following the compass, Ellie began walking west. The French countryside in March was cold and damp, mud sticking to her boots. Every sound, a branch breaking, a night bird, wind in the trees, made her heart race. After an hour of careful walking, she saw the church silhouette. Saint-Michel, a small construction, medieval, with gray stone bell tower. Nobody. Ellie checked her watch. 02:47. She was on time. Rossignol should be there. She entered the church cautiously. Old wooden pews, simple altar, extinguished candles, smell of old incense and damp stone. "Margot?" She spun, hand going instinctively to the small knife hidden in her boot. A man emerged from the shadows. 50-something, face marked by time and war, dark and intelligent eyes. He wore farmer's clothes, but moved with the precision of a soldier. "Rossignol. Welcome to France, mademoiselle." His smile was tired but genuine. "I'm Henri, and you're about to enter hell." Part 3. The Chateau. 10 days later, Ellie stood before the mirror in a modest Rennes hotel, completely transforming herself. Her hair, previously in a simple bun, now fell in elegant waves over her shoulders. The dress, a 1938 model in dark blue silk, slightly worn but still elegant, had been acquired by the resistance from an abandoned shop. Henri watched from the doorway, smoking a Gauloise. "You look like an aristocrat fleeing the war," he assessed. "Perfect." The last weeks had been an intensive course in survival in occupied France. Henri had shown her how to identify collaborators, how to behave at German checkpoints, never nervous, never defiant, just bored like any French woman under occupation, how to use simple codes in public conversations. "Today's the day," Henri said. "The party at Chateau de Montclair. Von Richter will be there. Half the world of collaborationist society, too. Your invitation arrived this morning." He handed her a cream envelope with embossed seal. Ellie opened it. Elegant calligraphy inviting Mademoiselle Margot Beaumont to a charity dinner in support of victims of Allied terrorist bombings. Nazi propaganda, of course, but also her way in. "Remember," Henri said, serious, Von Richter is dangerous precisely because he's charming. He makes you forget who he really is. Don't forget. Ellie met his eyes in the reflection. I never forget. Chateau de Montclair was a vision from a corrupted fairy tale. Medieval towers mixed with Renaissance expansions, surrounded by meticulously maintained gardens even in wartime. Nazi flags hung from the battlements, a blasphemy against the ancient beauty of French stone. The car, another loan from the resistance, stopped before the main entrance. SS guards in black uniforms checked her invitation, documents, even opened her small purse. Nothing but compact powder, lipstick, and an embroidered handkerchief. Bienvenue, Mademoiselle Beaumont. The main hall was packed. German officers in impeccable uniforms, French women in evening gowns, everyone performing obscene normalcy while war devastated the world outside. A string quartet played Mozart. Champagne flowed freely. Ellie accepted a glass from a waiter, her eyes sweeping the hall. She needed to find Von Richter without seeming like she was looking. Mademoiselle? A voice behind her, in impeccable French but with a slight German accent. She turned. It was him. The photographs didn't do justice. Klaus von Richter had a magnetic presence, tall, perfect military posture, but with something artistic in how he moved. His eyes were the coldest blue she'd ever seen. But when they smiled, they almost made you believe there was warmth there. Almost. Forgive my boldness, he continued, but I don't recognize your face, and I know everyone in this room. Ellie smiled, not too wide, just enough. Margot Beaumont. I'm new to the region. Paris became unbearable with the bombings. Ah, a Parisian. Genuine interest sparkled in his eyes. The city of light. I spent 3 years there before the war studying at the Sorbonne. International law, ironically. He laughed at his own bitter joke. And now you're here, helping administer coastal defense. Ellie said carefully. Administration. What a charming word to describe preparing for an imminent invasion. Von Richter took 2 champagne glasses from a passing tray, offering one to her. But tonight, let's forget the war. Tell me about Paris. What do you miss most? And so it began. He led her to the balcony where the night air was fresh and the party voices became distant. They talked about art, literature, the cafes of the Rive Gauche. Von Richter was incredibly cultured, quoting Proust and Baudelaire with ease. Ellie had to constantly remind herself. This elegant, charming man was responsible for the deaths of dozens of Allied agents. Beneath the cloak of civilization, there was a predator. You must visit me again, Von Richter eventually said, his eyes fixed on hers with disturbing intensity. I have a private collection of French first editions, Napoleon, Hugo, even some Voltaire manuscripts. Few appreciate such things nowadays. I would love to, Ellie responded, knowing she had just hooked her prey, or perhaps he had hooked his. As he escorted her back to the hall, his hand lightly touching her back, Ellie felt a chill, not of fear, but of acute awareness. She was dancing with the devil, and one false step meant destruction. But missions weren't won by those who retreated at the first sign of danger. Tommy hadn't retreated at Anzio. She wouldn't retreat at Montclair. The night continued. Empty conversations, forced laughter, the orchestra playing while Europe bled. But Ellie Morrison, disguised as Margot Beaumont, had taken the first step in a deadly dance. And somewhere in the darkness beyond the chateau, 52 men continued their routines, not knowing the bait had just been cast. The following 3 weeks were the most intense of Ellie's life. Von Richter, true to his word, invited her to return to the chateau, not once, but 7 times. Each visit was carefully orchestrated, afternoon teas in the library, walks through the gardens, intimate dinners where he recited German poetry, and she pretended to be enchanted, and she was getting too good at it. Margot, Von Richter called to her during a rainy April afternoon, both sitting in the library overlooking the misty gardens. You are a fascinating anomaly. Ellie looked up from the book she was pretending to read, Les Miserables, in the original French edition. How so? He stood, approaching her with that feline grace that kept her constantly alert. Most of the women here, they want something. Protection, luxury, status. But you? He paused, studying her face with surgical intensity. You seem to want only conversations, books, moments of normalcy in an abnormal reality. Perhaps, Ellie responded carefully. It's because I've lost everything. My home, my family, my world. These conversations, these moments, are all that remains of the life I knew. Truth mixed with lies, the best way to deceive. Von Richter smiled, in that way that made Ellie momentarily forget he wore the SS Death's head on his uniform. You remind me why I joined the party, you know, he said, his voice becoming distant. It wasn't out of hatred. It was for order, structure, the promise of rebuilding something beautiful from a chaotic world. But sometimes, he looked out the window, sometimes I wonder if we've built a castle or a prison. Ellie felt something dangerous, empathy. No, she forced herself to remember. This man ordered executions, tortured prisoners. The fact he had philosophical doubts didn't absolve him. Philosophy in wartime is dangerous, she said lightly. It can lead to inconvenient questions. How wise you are for your... He paused. How old are you, Margot? 24, she lied, adding years to her real age as instructed. Too young to carry so much loss. If only he knew. At night, when she returned to the small apartment the resistance had provided, Ellie transmitted coded reports via radio. Henri visited her weekly, always with new instructions from London. You're progressing well, Henri said during one of these visits, checking his notes. Von Richter is clearly interested, but we need concrete results. His monthly meeting with superior officers will be in 2 weeks. We need the fortification plans before that. He keeps everything in his personal office, Ellie explained. 3rd floor, east wing, always locked. He carries the key with him. Then you need access while he's not there. Or, Ellie said slowly, I need him to give me access. Henri looked at her with concern. Margot. Ellie, you know what that means? I'm not going to sleep with him, if that's what you're asking, she responded firmly. But I can make him trust me enough to lower his guard. Be careful, Henri warned. Men like Von Richter, they're dangerous precisely because they make you forget who they are. And sometimes, he lit another cigarette. Sometimes we forget who we are too. The opportunity came unexpectedly. A week before the crucial meeting, Von Richter invited Ellie to a private dinner. Just the two of them. The chateau was almost empty, most officers visiting coastal installations for final inspections. I've prepared something special, Von Richter said as he guided her to a room she'd never seen, a small dining room with just one table for two, candles, classical music playing softly from a gramophone. It was almost romantic, almost made you forget that Nazi flags hung just outside. The dinner was impeccable, coq au vin, fresh vegetables impossible to find on the black market, French wine from a cellar that had probably been looted. They talked about everything and nothing. Art, music, their dreams before war engulfed the world. I wanted to be a diplomat, Von Richter confessed, the wine loosening his tongue. Resolve conflicts through words, not bombs. What irony, no? And what changed? Ellie asked. Reality. He took another sip. The reality that the world didn't bow to beautiful ideals, only to force, and if you didn't exercise force, someone exercised it on you. Do you really believe that? Von Richter looked at her for a long time, rare vulnerability crossing his features. I used to not believe it. Now, I don't know what I believe anymore, Margot. Except... He extended his hand across the table, gently touching hers. That finding you in this dark time has been an unexpected light. Ellie felt her stomach turn, not from revulsion, but from something worse, compassion. This man was a monster, but he was also human, complex, contradictory, and she was about to destroy him. Klaus, she said, his first name for the first time. Can I ask you something? Anything. Your work, the coastal defenses, counter-espionage. It's not just military work, is it? It's personal. You're trying to prevent more death, more destruction. He laughed bitterly. You give me too much credit. I follow orders, Margot, like all of us. But yes, if I can do it in a way that minimizes unnecessary suffering, I try. Then show me, Ellie said impulsively, a calculated risk. show me that not everything in this war is just gray, that there's some purpose beyond destruction. Von Richter studied her intensely. Ellie maintained his gaze, heart beating wildly. This was a mistake, a terrible mistake, or a brilliant move. Finally, he stood up. Come. He guided her upstairs, through the silent corridors, to the third floor, East Wing, his office. Ellie could barely believe it. He was really going to... Von Richter unlocked the heavy oak door, turning on the lights. The office was a combination of library and military command, shelves full of books, but also maps on the walls, a huge desk covered with documents. This, he gestured to the maps, is my work, preventing massacres. The Allies will invade, that's certain. But if our defenses are well positioned, the battle will be decisive, quick, less prolonged suffering. He really believed this, Ellie realized with shock. His tortured logic saw his fortifications as humanitarian. While he talked, pointing to different coastal sectors, Ellie memorized everything. Every troop number, every artillery position, every weak point London needed to know. You're the first person, Von Richter said softly. I've shown this too. The first who tried to understand beyond the surface. Guilt hit Ellie like a wave. This man was trusting her, opening up, while she... No. Focus. Tommy died to stop this. Thousands would die if these defenses weren't neutralized. Thank you for trusting me, she said, and part of that was genuine. When Von Richter took her back to the chateau entrance hours later, he held her hand a moment longer than necessary. Margot, these weeks have been... He searched for words. A reminder that humanity still exists in this world. Thank you. Ellie smiled, knowing she was smiling at a dead man. That night, Ellie transmitted everything. Every detail, every number, every position. London responded. Information received. Operation Storm confirmed for April 22nd, 23 WAC hours. Extraction at 19:00. 4 hours before the bombing. Enough time to escape, if everything went perfectly. Henri visited her one last time 2 days before the operation. He seemed to have aged 10 years. You've done extraordinary work, Ellie. Better than any agent I've trained. But now comes the hardest part. Escaping. Living with it. She looked at him without understanding. Von Richter, Henri continued, you described him as complicated. Human. That makes it harder, not easier. If he were a simple monster, it would be easy. But complex people, their deaths weigh more. He's responsible for dozens of deaths, Ellie said, but her voice didn't have the conviction it should. Yes, and that doesn't change, but it also doesn't change that you spent weeks getting to know him as a person. That contradiction, Henri lit his eternal cigarette, will haunt you. Haunts all of us who do this work. April 22nd, 1944. The final day. Ellie arrived at the chateau at 18 Schrow, invited for one last visit before Von Richter's evening meeting with his officers. The resistance would be waiting in the forest at 19 Schrow. She would have exactly 1 hour to say goodbye and disappear. Von Richter received her in the library, looking tired. Tonight's meeting, he explained, is crucial. Final adjustments to defenses. The Allies could invade at any moment. Then I shouldn't be intruding, Ellie said, beginning to stand. No. He held her hand, gently but firmly. Stay a little longer, before I dive back into all of this. They sat in silence for a moment, listening to the rain begin to fall outside. Storm coming. Margot, Von Richter finally said, if the war ended tomorrow, if all this nightmare simply ended, what would you do? Ellie thought of Ellie Morrison, the girl who wanted to be a teacher, who loved French literature, who never imagined she'd become a spy. I would live, she answered honestly. Just live. What a simple dream, he smiled sadly. And how impossible. 1855. Ellie stood up, her heart tightening. I need to go. It's getting late and the rain. Von Richter also stood, For one terrible moment, Ellie thought he might try to kiss her, but he only took her hand, kissing her fingers gently. "Thank you, Margot, for everything. You reminded me that beauty still exists in this world." Ellie descended the chateau stairs for the last time, rain now falling heavily. The guards let her pass without problems. She was a known visitor. The forest was dark, the sound of rain masking her footsteps. She found Henri and 2 other resistance members waiting with a car. "Let's go," Henri said urgently. "We have 20 minutes before we can't get out of the safe bombing radius." Ellie got in the car, looking back one last time. Through the rain, she could see the lights of Chateau de Montclair. Inside, 52 men were gathering, discussing strategy, planning defenses, not knowing that in a few hours, the sky would fall upon them. The car took off, taking her away. But Ellie kept her eyes fixed on the chateau until it disappeared into the darkness and rain. 23 hours. The roar of RAF Lancaster bombers cut through the night sky. Ellie, already 15 kilometers away in a resistance safe house, heard the distant sound. Boom, boom, boom. Precision bombing. The coordinates she provided were exact. The RAF pilots were the best. Chateau de Montclair was hit by 12 high-explosive bombs in less than 3 minutes. There were no survivors,